for those. And so we're recording for those who might not be able to be here, but want to learn later on. This will be on a YouTube channel. So the recordings will be there forever and ever and ever. I want to introduce myself, and then I'll let Rabbi Katz introduce himself. And then he's going to teach first, and then I'm going to share second, and we might talk at the same time because that's what rabbis do. We can't help ourselves sometimes. But I'm Rabbi Cookie Olshein, and I'm the rabbi of Temple Emanuel of Tempe, Arizona. And my partner in crime here, I have literally known since before I went to rabbinical school. He was he's one of the reasons I'm a rabbi. Yeah, Rabbi Neal Katz. So, Rabbi Katz, if you'd like to share a little bit about yourself and then kick us off. Yeah. We'll spend this next 53 minutes together.
So you all probably know this already, but like rabbis, when we go to rabbinical school, we don't see each other ever again, and so we have these weird moments where we cross paths. So it's always fun. And so when Rabbi Bernholtz in Vero Beach helped organize this particular program, we just kind of signed up with other rabbis, and when Rabbi Olshein was available, I was like, oh, it'd be great to work with her because I've been on and off hanging out with her over the many years. So I'm a rabbi in Tyler, Texas. It's East Texas. It's 2 hours from Dallas. It's not near anything aside from Dallas. Madeline, who's hiding right now, which is fine. She's actually from Tyler originally, but she now lives in New York City, doing her wedding in December up in New York. So I'm just mentioning it because I'm looking down there. And so I've been here for 20 years. It's my first and only congregation. I'm one of those rabbis that never went through placement, and I'm now in year 20 of a 3-year contract. Literally, I've never changed my contract either, so I've just one place, small congregation. So 75 families, and I've been honored to work with Rabbi Bernholtz for a bunch of consortium programs like this that are pretty much new post-COVID, early days of COVID, where we're starting to get some strength back in the small congregational world where we can share with one another. So whether it's this, we did a Tisha B'Av program, there was a Purim program for Texas small congregations. Lots of cool things are happening like this. Okay, so let's talk about Kohelet. Here we are in the season of Sukkot. We're here on the Chol HaMoed, the intermediate days of Sukkot, and the way this program is designed, the 6 days of the Chol HaMoed are 6 different teachings of the 2 chapters each, right? So we have chapters 1, 2. So today is chapters 7 and 8 of the book of Ecclesiastes, also called Kohelet. I'm going to fight my own urge to, go through the long history of Kohelet, but all I want to say is whenever I introduce this text generically to my congregation, I always say, this is usually my phrase, I'll say, just remember, Kohelet or Ecclesiastes is an annoying teenager. It's just trying to figure out what's the point of everything. Everything I thought of has been thought of before. Everything I do has been done before. There's nothing new under the sun. Everything's like trying to catch the wind. And if we keep that in mind, this kind of pensive, annoyed, angst-ridden person, and especially one who is as wealthy and as fulfilled materially as this particular person is, it's an amazing text of biblical literature. But then there's this secondary question, which is, why did the rabbi say you have to read it on Sukkot, right? So to that, and I don't know if Rabbi Olshein has a better opinion on this or what I've been taught. Look, we come out of our physical houses, we come out of our permanent structures into a very vulnerable space. In Tyler, where I am, we've had a few nights of beautiful weather for our sukkah here at the congregation. Tonight it's raining, but tonight is the wine and cheese, right? So what happens if it's raining? Am I going to actually take my congregants and stick them with wet wine and cheese? No, we'll do it inside. Okay, we're going to cheat a little bit here. But the reality is being physically outside, being physically vulnerable to the elements, to whether the cold, the rain, and so forth, is the book that reflects that spiritually would be Kohelet, right? This vulnerability. So here we're going to look at chapter 7 and 8. I'm going to do a screen share of Sepharia. We're going to read through it, and I'll make a couple comments. I am interruptible. Madeline, who studies with me, she's like, not really interruptible, but please do. Just kind of pop in, and I'm happy to answer any questions or comment on anything. So I'm going to do a screen share here, make it a little bit bigger. Just for fun, people who know it in Hebrew. First word tov, like hine tov mode or hine matov. Right, so I'm going to scroll down. Okay. All right. So here we are, chapter 7. A good name is better than fragrant oil, and the day of death better than the day of birth? So I'm going to stop there for 1 second, because there's a couple pieces of that day of death text. I'm going to stop share here just for a moment. I'm going to do something because it's driving me crazy. I am going to take this text and open it in a Google Doc because I don't like the layout. So I apologize, everybody. Give me 1 second. I updated it, and so it better is the day of one's death. All right. Well, since Safari is not letting me do that, I'm gonna stick to.
Do you want it side by side or verse Hebrew English by verse?
Yes, but
okay, I got that.
Well,
no?
But I have it set in. It's already in a sheet here. It's fine.
Got
Look, all I want to do is I'm not going to do this with every piece, but I just want to talk about that second stitch. The day of death is better than the day of birth, right? Because there's two texts that we know of if you've been around the Jewish community and so forth, and I want to share them down here, right? One is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai taught there are 3 crowns. So many of you have heard this, especially in funeral texts: the crown of Torah, the crown of priesthood, and the crown of kingship. The crown of priesthood, Aaron merited it. The crown of kingship went to David. The crown of Torah is available for all generations. Anyone who acquires Torah, it's as though he's acquired all 3 of them. There's a funeral version of this that says, but the crown of a good name is better than them all, right? So now there's an extra crown. But the idea is that if we go back to the Kohelet text here, the day of death is better than the day of birth. We get, if you look into the Midrash connections here, they talk about the notion of crownship. But I want to share a better one. Some of you may have heard this story before, and it comes from a Midrash. Just stay with me here. And the question we're trying to answer is, how do we know that the day of death is better than the day of birth? So you may have seen this before. I'm cutting in here. When a person is born, no one should be joyous, which is opposite what we would think, right? Because they don't know what challenges and actions will confront them, whether they would be good or wicked or bad, right? Or righteous. When the person dies, they should rejoice that they passed away with a good name, a Keter Shem Tov, a crown of good name, and departed the world of peace. In other words, we know more about them in their passing than we do about them in their birth, right? So that's why the day of death should be joyous, which is an interesting thing. So then here's the famous story. 2 ships at sea. One was leaving the port, one was coming in. The one that was leaving the port, everyone rejoiced, yay! And the one, it messed up here. Regarding the one leaving the port, the one that was coming into the port, they didn't rejoice. The one that was leaving the port, I don't know why it messed up here. You get the idea, right? In other words, we know more about the person on their way out than we do on the way in. That metaphor got messed up in the translation. So there was a clever person who says, I see matters on the opposite. The one leaving port, they should not rejoice because they don't know what challenges will confront it, how many days it will be challenged, how many storms it will encounter. When it comes in, everyone should rejoice that it entered in peace. So it's the same thing. Similarly, when a person dies, everyone should rejoice and praise him that he passed away in peace from the world with a good name. That is what Solomon said, the day of death is better than the day of one's birth, referencing this text here in Ecclesiastes. Finally, you find that when the righteous are born, no one is aware of it, but when the righteous die, everyone is aware of it. So I get a little proverb heavy here with the text, but I just want to say, what does it mean to say that a good name is better than fragrant oil, and the day of death is better than the day of birth? The day of death is, we know our deeds have been counted, our righteous actions have been noted. That is a time of rejoicing. It's counterintuitive, right? We want to cheer when a baby comes in, and we want to be sad when people die. We should be joyous. Okay, fine. Let's move on in Ecclesiastes. So we're just going to read through 7. It's better to go into a house of mourning than a house of feasting. For that is the end of every mortal, and the living should take it to heart. So again, the opposite of what you would think, right? So here, Kohelet figures out the opposite. Right? I want to go into a house where there's a lot of food and joy, right? No. Go into a house of mourning, because that'll remind you that you are mortal. Again, a very angst-ridden person, right? And by the way, what's the joy of finding out that you're going to die? What's the existential benefit of knowing that there's death? The existential benefit is it causes you to prioritize. Don't get swept away in frivolities and silliness and so forth. Prioritize. You've got a countdown clock. Your birth certificate has an expiration date. No one knows the day that they're going to die, except my uncle. because the judge told them. It's a dumb joke. It's a joke, right? But nobody knows the day they're going to die. So if that's the case, then we have to live with that existential awareness. But that actually pushes us to, in the words of our old prayer book, we are prisoners of the years, but that prison is the prison in which we, forced by the years, create. Right? We are to prioritize, to create, to become industrious with that big heaviness of death in front of us. And so here we are in Kohelet. Go to the house of mourning. That'll cause you to live life. Vexation is better than revelry, for though the face be sad, the heart may be glad. The wise are drawn to the house of mourning, and the foolish to a house of merrymaking. Kind of referencing back to what Kohelet said in verse 2. It's better to listen to the reproof of someone wise than to listen to the praise of fools. I love this text, right? It's very proverb feeling, right? But, we all are going to do better when we have constructive criticism from intelligent people who are going to help us tweak ourselves to course correct than being surrounded by yes people.
Can I jump in, Rabbi?
Yeah.
So this one I think is particularly important to note, that it does happen during Sukkot, right? Right after we have Yom Kippur. So to figure out, we've just been through this sort of near-death experience metaphor with Yom Kippur, and we're supposed to have committed to living a better life. And now we're given yet another instruction about how to do that. About, right, you've just examined 5 days ago the meaning of life, and now this is the how-to guide in a lot of ways for me.
Yeah. I'm trying to...
And it's really hard to listen to reproof. It's so much easier just to listen to praise.
I'm stopping share for 1 second so I can copy the link because somebody's trying to get in here. Okay. All right. For the levity of the fool is like the crackling of nettles under a kettle. That's a weird phrase, and the Hebrew of it is even stranger. But here's our punchline here at 6. That too is hevel, and I put the word hevel, the Hebrew word, in illusory. For those of you who like Hebrew, let's look here. Hiksil v'gamze hevel. So hevel is probably the key word of all of Kohelet, right? So what does it mean that it's illusory, or there's another way to translate it as meaninglessness, or it's actually connected to the word smoke or vapor. It's something that you, even if you grab onto it, just sort of vaporizes it. It's not solid, right? That imagery is problematic because you're trying to grab something, right? So the levity of fools, but it's not just here. It occurs 30 plus times throughout the entire book of Ecclesiastes. When you hear the phrase vanity of vanity, all is vanity, it's like trying to catch the wind. Okay. For cheating may rob the wise of reason and destroy the prudence of precautions. Sorry, I'm trying to do two things at once here. For the end of the matter is better than the beginning of it. Better a patient spirit than a haughty spirit. Again, we're kind of in proverb mode here. Don't let your spirit be quickly vexed, for vexation abides in the breasts of fools. It's not really clear what that's going on here. Let me do my share. Good, done. Don't say, how has it happened that former times were better than these? For it is not wise of you to ask that question. So I just want to say, I'll get into a little political hot water here for a second, right? Like we have a romanticization of the past, right? When in reality, the past had its share of struggles in ways that the present is also feeling and the future will feel, right? So let's not over-romanticize the past to where like, oh, if it was only better like it was back in the time before. And I don't mean to sound political here. I'm just saying some of you may hear it that way. Just understand every generation has its struggles. And so don't sit there and fantasize about it having been better at former times. It's not wise, Kohelet says. Wisdom is as good as patrimony, and even better for those who behold the sun. For to be in the shelter of wisdom is also to be in the shelter of money. And the advantage of intelligence is that wisdom preserves the life of one who possesses it. Now, that's too much to deconstruct right now. But remember, this is a king in Jerusalem, as it said in the beginning in chapter 1, who has everything, right? Access to intelligence, to books, and he's intelligent, he's got money, and he's got wives, he's got everything. He's still trying to sense what's the point of it all, right? It's all hevel. Consider God's doing. Who can straighten that which has been twisted? So in a time of good fortune, enjoy the good fortune. In a time of misfortune, reflect. That's a beautiful text. The one no less than the other was God's doing. Consequently, mortals may find no fault with God. Let's hit pause here. If you want to write a rabbinic thesis, just do it on line 14, right? When you're having a good time, enjoy it. When you're having a bad time, reflect on it, right? And why? Because both of those, good and bad, are both the doing of God. And you can't blame God for the good. That's a weird word to use. And you can't blame God for the bad, right? There's a lot of deep theology going on in that one sentence, right? Where we want to ascribe to God the good times and the bad times, right? And sometimes we become angry at one time and happy with the other. Just read Job and that'll fix that problem. Okay, in my own brief lifespan, I've seen both of these things. Sometimes someone good perishes despite their goodness, and sometimes someone wicked endures despite their wickedness. So we know from the biblical text, we hope in some high-minded form of theology, consistent theology, we hope that righteous people get rewarded and wicked people suffer. We hope, we pray, and if we're going to believe in a God of a divine reward and punishment, which I don't, but if we're going to believe in that, then that's how the world should go. But we know that wicked people get benefits, and we know that righteous people suffer. There's tragedy in a godly world. How do we make sense of that? Our job is not to answer that question right now. It's just to say, this is the kind of contemplation we have to bring before God. And I'm going to share, because Marie shared the line. She says she's having financial problems, and she thinks of how good she used to have it, but I was unhappy in my wealth. I didn't enjoy it. Now I'm truly happy if I don't get into my head about how much I used to have. I love all of this text, right? So, and I thank you for sharing that, Marie. I want to say, it's important for me. It's very spiritually fulfilling for me to know that he was dealing with the same junk that I'm dealing with today, thousands of years ago, right? As he's contemplating it from a different position than I am, right? So if money is the question here, he already says elsewhere in the text, money isn't the answer, intelligence isn't the answer, lots of people around you isn't the answer, so forth. But if we're going to have to start having a conversation about God and reward and punishment, it would be easy for me to sell religion to you if good people were rewarded and wicked people were punished. That's the hard part, right? So don't overdo goodness and don't act too wise. You may be dumbfounded. By the way, the least important thing I'm going to share with you today is the word dumbfounded, which if you go to Sepharia, does not have a B in it. And I wrote to Sepharia last night, I go, I think you misspelled it, because they wrote D-U-M, founded. And he wrote back to me this morning, he said, he sent me a quote from the encyclopedia, or from the dictionary, that said either one is correct. So just so you know, if you see this differently in Sepharia, I tried. But I put it in my text. In other words, don't get too caught up in yourself, and kind of to what Marie said, don't get, everybody's wise when they have money. Everybody's wise, everybody's smart, a genius when they've done well. By the way, I'm not ashamed to say this, I'm a poker player, right? And so we have this running joke when you play poker. When you win a hand, you're like, I'm the smartest player alive. And then, of course, the next hand you lose, right? Everything resets at a certain point. But the idea that, don't get too cocky with the idea that you get it, because the opposite will happen. And don't overdo wickedness. Don't be a fool, or you may die before your time. It's best that you grasp the one without letting go of the other. For those who fear God will do their duty by both. In other words, let's live in that tension between goodness and wickedness, between righteousness and evil. Let's live in that. Let's not deny God's capacity to rule both, but let's recognize that we're going to have both moments of those in our lives. Wisdom is more of a stronghold to someone wise than 10 magnates that a city may contain. For there's not one good person on earth who does what is best and doesn't mess up. By the way, we're getting to a really important text here that we're all going to have fun with. Finally, Kohelet says, don't pay attention to everything that is said, so that you may not hear your slave reviling you. For well you may remember the many times that you yourself have reviled others. When you... Karma, right? Just calm down. Everything is circular, and that which you do is going to come back at you. All this I tested with wisdom. I thought I could fathom it, but it eludes me, right? Hevel. The secret of what happens is elusive, and deep, deep down, who could discover it? Right? Who can really understand why what happens? I put my mind to studying, to exploring, to seeking wisdom, then the reason of things, and to studying wickedness and stupidity, madness and folly. And by the way, here we go. I'm not proud of this next line from great grandpa Kohelet, but here we go. Now I find more bitter than death the woman who is all traps, whose hands are fetters, whose heart is snares. He who is pleasing to God escapes her, and he who is displeasing is caught by her. So time out. I've only got a couple more lines left, but let me just I can't ignore this. Look, if you all are confused by this, fine. Interestingly, when you go through Sefaria, the website that's doing this, I don't know if you know this, Rabbi, they now have as a translation option the JPS, gender neutral, right? So I didn't know that until last night. So I'm using the gender neutral, and it still has the text. I was like, oh, I hope they clean this up. They don't, because that's what the text says. The text in Hebrew is very clear. So what does it mean, woman? And what we find here biblically is how the rabbis are going to address this. Now, historical rabbis aren't going to have the same problems that we would have it today as modern Jews, right? They're not going to be weirded out that he's saying more bitter than death as a woman. But Rashi, 1,000 years ago, he lived from 1040 to 1105 in France. Rashi did, based on a lot of other texts, reference woman as a metaphor for idolatry. I'm not saying a woman is idolatrous, but woman is a metaphor in biblical text, if we're going to understand Rashi, of heresy and idolatry. So now let's read it that way, right? I find more bitter than death the idolatry, the heresy. It could be. The question is, could it be a reference to Lilith? Sure, right? If Kohelet knew the Lilith text here, I wished he had said Lilith, right? But I find more bitter than death, if we're going to use Rashi's language, the heresy who is all traps. Right? Idolatry is the hands are fetters and the heart is snares. One who is caught, he who is pleasing to God escapes idolatry, and one who's this way. Okay, I'm not saying it's a guarantee, but it's maybe a better way to read it rather than getting into the gender problem of what Kohelet said. And by the way, I don't have to go back 100 generations to Ecclesiastes to find a problematic uncle that made a comment. Right? I can go back one generation to my dad, right? But it's not all. It's there, okay. But it's contextualized within some other beautiful texts. Finally, just last few lines. See, this is what I found, said Kohelet, item by item in my search for the reason of things. And as for what I sought further but didn't find, I found only one true human being in 1,000. And among all these, I didn't find a truly compatible woman. But see, this I did find. God made human beings plain, but they have engaged in too much reasoning. You're too thinky, people. Quit trying to think through everything and understand everything, because I'm telling you right now, it's not all understandable. So that's chapter 7. I'm going to hit pause, and I'm going to turn it over to Rabbi Olshein, and then hopefully we can open it up for some questions. But I love the text. These are helpful.
Right. Anybody want to share any thoughts now on chapter 7 before we move on to 8? Jump in. Quiet group. I'm going to be very participatory and ask you lots of questions. So I'm hoping that at least the Tempe people will jump in, although I really hope it's everyone who jumps in. So chapter 8 does not have as many pithy quotes or in the form of proverbs. And so it is I would say even more dark than chapter 7. So we're going to look at it on Sefaria here. And I want us to look at the Hebrew and the English together. And the way we're going to do it is I want you to view chapter 8 as an entire section dealing with doubt and uncertainty, because this for me is really the heart of uncertainty. And what does it mean to lean into uncertainty in our lives? Okay, so here we are. We have, who is like the wise man and who knows the meaning of the adage, the proverb? A man's wisdom lights up his face, so that his deep discontent is dissembled. And you should know that this is this JPS 1985 translation is he does take liberties. It takes liberties. And so when I say it takes liberties, it says so that his deep discontent is dissembled. If we look at the Hebrew, it says the wisdom of man, Chochmat Adam, Ta'ir, lights up or causes light, Panav, upon his face. Okay, well, a man's wisdom lights up his face. Ve'oz Panav Yeshuneh. This one sounds a little different. So Ve'oz, like, and the strength, Panav, of his face, the strength of his face changes. So a man's wisdom lights up his face, and the strength in his face is caused to change. And so, like, we have Shana, right, for the word year, Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year. That word also is related to the concept of change. Now, you know that, let's see, let's keep going. So on here we have, and I'm going to rush through some of these, and I apologize, even though it says don't rush. It says, I do. So understanding like his deep discontent is dissembled. The response is, I do obey the king's orders and don't rush into uttering an oath by God. So we've got the king, which may either be the king in front of you, Solomon is writing, or the king as God. Probably the king as whoever your ruler is in front of you. At this point, and please know that there are some people who say Solomon wrote this, or other people who say it was sort of codified as late as 450 BCE. Others say maybe as late as like 180 BCE, when it was actually codified as a book, and so far after Solomon's death. So maybe the king in front of you, right? Whoever is your ruler in the time. Obey them, but don't rush into making a promise to God about something that a human king is asking you to do. And we get the next piece that says, leave that king's presence. Okay. Don't wait around in a dangerous situation.
Rabbi?
Now, yes.
It cut in and out just for a second.
Oh, I'm sorry. So here we are. So the king from whom you can do anything. I'm sorry, I jumped out and I'm jumped back in. I'm not sure where I left you. Let me share my screen again.
Okay.
All right. Can you see my screen now? I hope. Okay. Apologies for repeating. I'm sorry. So we're in front of a king, probably, and it says, don't put yourself in a situation where you might have to utter an oath to God against what God really wants you to do, and get out of their presence, because when you're standing in front of the king, you can't really say to the king, what are you doing? Now, anybody, as Rabbi Katz said earlier, I might get in trouble. You might hear this as being political, but imagine in modern times now, people who are the ruler, the elected officials, helpers, and it's really hard to say, what are you doing? Right? To stop somebody in power from doing what they want to do. It's very difficult. And so here, one can read that the author is actually saying, don't put yourself in the situation where you don't feel like you can actually give that reproof that we just heard about in Ecclesiastes chapter 7, right? You need to be in a place where you can be your authentic self and actually kindly, quietly, appropriately reproof someone. Tell them when they're doing wrong. So I want to stop there for just a second and ask if that resonates with anybody. Or are you too scared to jump in and say that it might? Yeah, Marie, hi.
A lot of times I have connections that have nothing to do with anything, but I was in a situation where I was at a Oktoberfest, and the musicians were not put on stage when they were supposed to be put on stage because there was a football game going on, and I was friends with the band, and there was people that were out and out, like getting into arguments over that. And the leader of the band told me, wait till after and write a complaint in. And I think that's like, I mean, I understand what you're saying, and I can understand situations like that.
Yeah, I think it happens to many of us. Thea, you've got your hand raised.
Yes, Rabbi. I have a question and then an answer. Well, an answer to your question and then a question. Um, when people talk about why did the Holocaust happen and why did this happen, why did that happen? And if God is in charge of everything, which I'm not sure I buy that either, but if God is in charge of everything, then how did these horrible things happen? Well, maybe it's not for us to understand. Maybe we don't ask the boss, why are you doing this? Why do we don't ask, kids ask their parents and they say, because I said so. Well, how often does God say, because I said so? So
Yeah, I
I
mean,
think that,
Ani Adonai Elohechem, I am Adonai your God, period. Done.
period. And so, and I remember that from our last source study. And I think that sometimes it takes a lot to realize, you know what, you don't have to understand everything. So here's my question to the
Hey,
two
before
of
you ask the question, let me just say, I think that for each and every one of us, that's the challenge, right? Figuring out where on the spectrum do we feel that it is our sacred obligation to speak up, right? Not just accept whatever is given to us. And, where are we on the spectrum? How much does it matter to us? Where do we find that obligation? What obligates us to say, Dainu, like, it's enough already. It would have been enough if you would just shut up or not done this, or, it would have been enough. And here we are. I mean, I got a private message from somebody giving me a political example, and I was like, yeah, right.
So to piggyback what you said, why do you think that and I hate to say it this way, but why do you think you're so important that you need to understand what's going on, everything that's going on?
Yeah, I don't think Kohelet teaches that. I think Kohelet says, understand that you will, and especially later in chapter 8, it's going to really remind us that it's not our job, right?
Right.
I mean, even in Torah, we have the line that says that, sort of relationships between humans, that's for us to deal with and for us to know. But relationships between us and God, that's hidden, that's secret from us. God's power, God's true power, right? And only if we were God would we have the power to understand everything happening in the world. There's, that's a line that we read on Yom Kippur. So I think it's a yes and situation, not an either or. Yes, and we are curious, as you've heard me talk about, be curious, not judgmental, a little line from Ted Lasso, right? So try to understand everything you can, but don't think that you get to be the arbiter, the judge of the one way to do things right? Or the one and only response. So
Okay, here's my question.
okay.
And there's 3 rabbis on this call, so we should get at least 4 different answers. So we read Kohelet during Sukkot,
Yeah.
which puts it right after Yom Kippur.
Mhm.
So my question is, from a chronological history standpoint, two things. When was it decided that we would read Kohelet on Sukkot? And this is talking about oaths to God, and it's very difficult for me to hear about oaths to God without thinking about Kol Nidre. So when was Kol Nidre put in the liturgy for Yom Kippur? When was Kohelet said to be studied during Sukkot? And I wonder if there's a flow to those 3 things, or am I just making it up in my head?
So I'm going to answer the Kol Nidre question first. So Kol Nidre, it depends on what everything in Judaism depends on which scholars you look at, but some say the 500s, 600s, 700s. So think about what was happening Jewishly when Kol Nidre, or Kal Nidre, as our Sephardic friends like to tell us, Kal Nidre because it's Aramaic. But if I were to say Kal Nidre in services, people would say, Rabbi, you're mispronouncing it, right? So think about what's happening in the world with respect to Christianity right before Kal Nidre gets, comes up. Christianity, you're having, this is going to be a little left turn from our Ecclesiastes, but we're having Christianity really sort of finding itself in the 400s, right? And sort of defining like, okay, if you believe this, you're a Christian, you're no longer a Hebrew Christian, now you're just a Christian by the 400s, right? So as Christianity is rising and the concept of as long as you believe in Jesus, everything is going to be okay happens, let's say in the 400s-ish, by the 500s, 600s, and 700s, we do change and we do respond and we do add things into our liturgy. And Kol Nidre is saying, okay, so where's the personal responsibility? At this point, I'm going to say a prayer during Yom Kippur, or our communities are going to say prayers during our Yom Kippur that talk about responsibility and understanding that we are imperfect human beings. And we create this legal formula to say, okay, we're going to screw up. God, please, for the screw ups that we do in the future, because it's not backwards looking, it's forwards looking, forwards thinking, feeling, right? For those future screw ups, we are going to say, please, God, forgive us. I'm not sure if that helps. Does that help with that?
That helps.
Did I forget a part of the question?
The other part of the question was when was Kohelet attached to Sukkot? But I'm taking up too much of your time,
I mean,
and you only have like 15 more minutes. So
Yeah, Rabbi Katz, you have thoughts?
it was rabbinic period. I mean, it was definitely a conversation that occurred we're talking 1800 years ago or so, certainly longer before Kol Nidre comes around. So, look, I mean, we have the benefit of being on this side of the calendar spectrum, so we can kind of we can create meaning for the connectivity of all these things. But it was a rabbinic invention connection, maybe about 1900 years ago, to put Kohelet and Sukkot together.
Thank you. That's the part I forgot to answer. All right, so we're going to go back to the text, and you're going to see it says, one who obeys the orders of the king, they're not going to suffer. You just follow along. You don't suffer any consequences. And it says, a wise man will bear in mind that there is a time of doom. This translation, the time of doom means you're going to die, right? A wise man is going to say, we're all going to die anyway. So if you're going to take the safe way out, if that's the choice you're going to make, to take the safe way out, that's one choice. But a wise man is going to say, we're all going to die anyway. And so when I read this, I think about this concept of what do we stand for? What is it that each of us, what's the meaning of your life? What do you stand for? Okay. So one who obeys orders, you go along with the flow. Don't worry. No danger comes to you. But a wise man is going to say, you know what? I'm going to die anyway. What is it what's the meaning of my life? And then we get back to this phrase, for there is a time for every experience, including death, the doom, okay? For a man's calamity overwhelms him. Indeed, the person does not know what is to happen, even when it's on their point of happening. Who can tell them? So I'm going to stop there for just actually, I want to do one more. No man has authority over the life breath, right? Okay. No man has authority, no person, to hold back life breath. There's no authority over the day of death. There's no mustering out from that war, the war between living and dying. Wickedness is powerless to save the owner. I want to stop there for a second, and I want to just share this with you. Each of us has known somebody that has been in hospice. Every one of us. And hopefully lots, as we say goodbye or the end of our life approaches, we'll consider hospice, or our family will consider hospice for us. Truly acceptable in the Jewish faith. I can't tell you the number of people who have tried to tell me that they want to have a funeral on day X when their loved one has entered hospice. They will say, well, the family can all be here on Sunday, so can we go ahead and plan the funeral? And it's Tuesday. And I say, no, you can't plan the funeral until somebody dies. Because we all know this, nobody decides when we're coming into this world. Nobody decides when it's time for our last breath. And to say we're going to plan a funeral on Sunday when someone has entered hospice, I'm like, that's between them and God. I truly believe that people choose when their last breath is going to be. I've seen people fight for weeks in hospice. I've seen people go into hospice and die the next day. And so when we're experiencing loss or when we're in anticipatory grief, yes, our brains are like not thinking straight. But this whole idea that we have any control over the day that we're going to die, I think we have to sort of lean into this idea of understanding that we are most of the time not in control. And Marie, I want to just say I have such compassion for you. People want control over their day of death. And sometimes, boy, do they lean into that and they say, well, I'm doing it now. And that's suicide, right? Saying I'm going to take control. Or even physician-assisted suicide. I'm going to take control. But 99.999% of us do not take control like that and do not know the day of our death. This is an answer to that question as to whether it is okay. I don't know. People need to feel in control. There's a book I want to share with you, just a little teaching about this concept of whether or not we have authority over our life breath. And I should say, except for people who make the choice, either due to mental illness or because of their physical illness with physician-assisted suicide, I should make that. I want to share a different screen with you. There's a book out by a woman named Estelle Frankel, and the book title is called The Wisdom of Not Knowing, Discovering a Life of Wonder. And she's talking, her whole thesis is about embracing uncertainty, which fits perfectly with the book of Ecclesiastes. And this piece right here that I'm sharing with you right now is a piece from a sermon that was given by Rabbi Marcy Block this past Kol Nidre on the book, The Wisdom of Not Knowing. And so she teaches from Ellen Frankel's book. She says, at last, understand that uncertainty is an integral part of faith. That religious faith requires the ability to grapple with doubt, to face uncertainty, and not know. That's from Ellen Frankel. She says, to be a Jew is to be part of the people of Israel. Like our ancestor Jacob called Israel, we are supposed to question and grapple with God. We're supposed to not know. Part of being a spiritual person is accepting that we cannot know. It doesn't make us failures. No one knows. Both faith and growth require a certain amount of doubt and uncertainty. We have to let go of the fixed forms that say, I can control, I can determine, I can decide. So when we're in Ecclesiastes, in this time of fragility, right, of being in the holiday of Sukkot, when we are struggling with what does it mean to have permanence in our lives, I think it's appropriate to read Ecclesiastes and ask ourselves the questions, how do we lean in to times of uncertainty? How good are we at leaning in? Now, there's this concept in Judaism about sort of feeling like you're standing on the edge, right? Waiting to go into something new. And it's even built into how we define ritual, and how we create ritual. And this concept sort of standing on the edge. I mean, imagine the Israelites standing on the edge, waiting to go into the promised land. All of that uncertainty that they're feeling, the not knowing, the what comes next. Imagine being on that 40-year journey through the desert, that really long journey of not knowing what's in front of you. Imagine like being told, gather your stuff, take the gold and silver from the Egyptians, and you're getting out of here. And this guy Moses is going to lead you, and he's a great leader and all, but I don't know what's coming up. I don't know where I'm going. All I know is the comfort of what I used to know, which Rabbi Katz mentioned a few minutes ago about, sort of putting that positive spin on what happened in the past without necessarily having a clear vision of how hard it was in the past, right? Someone asked me in the chat, the book name is The Wisdom of Not Knowing. Wisdom, and it's by Ellen Frankel. And excuse me, Estelle Frankel, Estelle, Estelle Frankel, Frankel, and it says discovering a life of wonder by embracing uncertainty. Discovering a life of wonder. I mean, this is the opposite, obviously, of what Ecclesiastes is doing. I mean, he is, I just don't know what's going on. I just can't understand it. What's the point of it all anyway, right? As opposed to, imagine if he said, I don't know what's going on, but wow, what lays before me is all the possibilities in the world. So now I'm going to ask you to share. What do you think about these two different potential viewpoints? You're in chapter 8 already out of 12. This would be the time where you can raise your hand and share. Joe, hi.
Hi, Rabbi. I was thinking about uncertainty before as you were talking earlier.
Yeah.
And, that could be difficult for people, but it also could be beneficial to people. Sometimes uncertainty makes life interesting and you appreciate more of what you have, okay, at different points in your life. So that's just the thought.
Absolutely. Look, if everything in life is about reframing, right? I sit with bar and bat mitzvah students and I ask them, I give them 2 minutes, every single one of my kids. I give them 2 minutes and I set a timer and I have them make a list of 1 to 10 of things they're grateful for. Gratitude, a gratitude list, every single bar and bat mitzvah student. And I say, I want you to think personally about what you're grateful for you, what you're grateful for your family, what you're grateful for your communities. And I ask them, tell me your different communities. Oh, well, my school community, my temple community, my sports communities, my band community. What are you grateful for your country? And what are you grateful for your world? Because, when you're 13 years old, gratitude may not be the thing that you are most comfortable practicing, right? As sort of reshaping. And we talk always about reshaping the challenges into blessings, right? And so trying to get them into that moment where, oh my God, I've got all these stresses, because 13-year-old kids have tons of stresses, and trying to help them reframe, which is what we do all day long. Every time we see a challenge and turn it into an opportunity, right? Every time we feel that fragility and we try to maneuver our brains and our hearts into thinking opportunity, fragility into opportunity, trying to make that maneuver happen with intention. First of all, understanding it, right? That, oh gosh, I'm in this zone of, and I need to go take a deep breath. And Estelle Frankel, excuse me, I keep calling her Ellen. I know an Ellen Frankel. Estelle Frankel, in her book, she's trying to give us tools. She says, stop and practice gratitude, stop and think about meditation, stop and figure out how to reframe so that you can feel comfortable as opposed to uncomfortable in the unknown. Marie, you have your hand up.
Yes, when I was young, I thought that I could do anything in the world, and I could be anything I could be and do anything I could do. And I had a lot of problems and a lot of missed opportunities. And now I'm 55 and I realize that I can't do everything I want to do and be everything I want to be, that it's just not feasible. And that's there's grief in that. But I do that reframing thing all the time. It's a matter of whether I want to have a lack mindset or an abundance mindset. And I do gratitude lists all the time. And I'm really glad you said that. It's when I wake up in the morning, I wake up with the first thing I think to myself is, what is my intention for the day and what am I grateful for? And that really reframes it.
Yeah. I mean, imagine where, the author or authors of Kohelet are in their minds, right? I might say that Kohelet is in a state of clinical depression. When you read all these chapters, you could easily walk away and say, "Eesh, like he needs therapy and some help." And yet he's asking the questions of life in there at the same time. This is, how do I make meaning? right? How do I bring meaning to the mundane? Yeah. Thea, you have got your hand up.
So there's a line in Kohelet that I did not realize until I just read it. There's a graduation card that I always used to give to every person I knew that graduated from high school, college, rabbinical school, medical school. And it says you cannot control the wind, but you can adjust your sails.
Yeah. Kohelet has to learn that. Yeah. Thank you. It's beautiful. Yeah. How much are we really in control of, right? Helena, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I was just thinking about reframing sort of the lack of control you might have or not knowing something. And I'm a teacher, and when I was starting teaching like 12 years ago, I was terrified of not knowing what was going to happen during a lesson. And now I'm like, that's the beauty of it, right? Because I don't know what my kids are going to do on any given day. And that's the exciting part of my job. I wouldn't want to know.
Right. So being able to embrace the chaos of a classroom,
Yeah, exactly.
of life,
Yeah.
to be open to reveling in that kid that has that aha moment in the weirdest, unexpected way, whatever that is, not in the way you intended it, but the way they discovered it, right? Yeah, it's a ton of lessons in there. I want to end my part by just sharing my screen one more time and sharing something from one of the greatest, most wise teachers in my life, my mother. So she would have loved this text if she had known it. She says, here's the text from Kohelet. Here's a frustration that occurs in the world. Sometimes an upright person is requited according to the conduct of the scoundrel, and sometimes a scoundrel is requited according to the conduct of the upright. I say all of this, and we have that same Hebrew phrase, shagam ze havel. Okay, that phrase that Rabbi Katz mentioned was more than 30 times in Ecclesiastes. In chapter 8, there is this whole idea of like bad people not getting their comeuppance and good people suffering and not getting their due. And so I want just to leave you with my mother's teaching. She used to say, you don't have to worry about what anybody else does in their life, whether they get punished for doing wrong or whether they get lifted up when you don't think they deserve it. You just worry about you. Don't worry about anybody else, because you and your actions are the only thing that you can potentially control. She would say potentially, right? Because we can't control anything that's coming at us, but we can control our response. So I'm going to end there. Rabbi Katz was kind enough to remind me that we were nearing the end of our time. Any last thoughts? Anyone wants to share? Are you going to go out into the world today, maybe for one day, and think about how we reframe?
I think, Rabbi, I think all you could do, Joel, I think all you could do is to say, did you do the best you can? Did you follow your plan? Did you live life as you feel life should be lived? And as long as you can answer that, positively, then what's going to be is going to be. You followed your dream.
I want to also just say that not every moment of our lives can we do that. And so I'm going to just add for myself, Joel, did I tip the scales more towards that than less?
Exactly.
I need to be kind to myself. So Rabbi Katz, final words.
So I'm going to build off of what Joel just said as a closer. So we built the sukkah here. And so here's what I spend my week doing. I'm annoyed that it's not perfectly aligned. I'm annoyed that the matting at the top isn't touching each other and perfectly this way. I'm mad that the bamboo is not whatever. Like there's some OCD part of it. Like, and you do the best you can, right? You try and create the dwelling you can as best you can with the limited time and resources that you have, and then you live in that. Like both metaphorically and literally, you live in that and you spend time in that and you study that and you do the best you can with the structure that you've been able to build.
You can do.
Yeah. So that, beautiful connection between the holiday and the text.
Thank you, rabbis, for a very interesting program.
I hope you all can continue to join. You got a few more chapters, and if you want to know what the punchline of Kohelet is, you have to wait till Friday. It'll be this same link, and feel free to share it around, or because I don't know if the registration's working, but those of you that have it can keep.
Can somebody send us the link as to how to get the recordings?
Yes, that'll come out after the week ends. We'll be able to share that.
Okay, thank
I
you.
know that the URJ that has captured all the emails, that they're probably going to send out that recording somehow. So, all right.
Yeah,
Well,
it'll
thank
be
you
a
all for
link.
joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Rabbi
you.
Katz.
Listening
Thanks for
program.
Thank
joining
you,
us.
Rabbi.
Thank you. Bye
All
bye.
right.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
That's great. Thank